G'day everyone, welcome to the Australian Reptile Park, and today we are bringing tree kangaroos to your lounge room. Tree kangaroos are a marvel of evolution. They're only found in Northern Australia. There's two species called the Lumholtz and the Bennetts, and then there's a whole bunch of species, over 10, in Papua New Guinea and West Papua. Now I say they're a marvel of evolution because you're looking at a species, and this here is Kimbe, and her partner up here is Banjo. He's just hopping around on the other side. I say they're a marvel of evolution because the common ancestor of kangaroos and tree kangaroos was a little mammal, even before they were marsupials, just a tiny little rat-like mammal. And at a point, they've come down to the ground and they've turned into kangaroos. And after becoming a kangaroo, and I should have mentioned at the start, the old here you go, have one bit of this. The common ancestor lived in the trees. So you've had an ancestor that came from the trees, turned into a kangaroo on the ground, and then that kangaroo has gone back up a tree. Now, I just want to show you something very quickly, and I mentioned that about their evolutionary process because they're so clumsy. So if you compare a tree kangaroo to, let's say, a spider monkey, one is a marsupial, the other is a placental mammal, very different. But a spider monkey never touches the ground. Their arms and legs are so nimble with the prehensile tail that they really don't come to the ground, and therefore they don't walk very well. But up in the trees, they're incredibly agile. Tree kangaroos have to climb down a tree like a fireman on a ladder. They come down backwards. They are not as agile as you would expect for an animal that lives almost all of its life in the trees. Now you've got an incredibly long counterweight for a tail. So that sits while they balance, it sits while they jump, but you can see it just now. With the heavy set front arms and head, it really balances off there against the body. Here you go. Now I've got a few treats. Now Kimber has a little trick that's not that friendly. If you don't feed her in time, she bites you. And it's just a little love nip, but it doesn't tickle. Here you go. Now come on in, have a look at this. So look at the size of that tail. You know, it's as thick as my arm. Have a look at the forelimbs. Now those forelimbs here, really useful for holding on to food, but also incredibly useful for climbing. Really, really powerful. Now, while they're up in the trees, which is where they spend their whole life, I'll go through just the reproductive processes. So when you have a male and female mate, like all marsupials, the pregnancy is really short. We're talking only around a month, so 1 month for a full gestation. Now, when the joey's born, there's a little cloaca down the bottom here. And so the joey crawls from that cloaca up into a pouch. So, here you go. Would you like a bit of nana? Good girl. Now, remember, we're talking a marsupial. So this is something that gives birth to a tiny little jelly bean. That jelly bean climbs up into the pouch where it spends the first 6 months of its life. Now, Kimbe and Banjo have only been together for about 6 months, and she's a bit of an old girl, but we're very hopeful that with a new environment and a new pairing, that we could have little Kimbes in not so long. Now, the first sign we'd see of a joey would be swelling down here. Can you come around and have a quick look at that? This is the pouch. Okay, so just inside here is the opening to the pouch. And the first that we would see is we'd see a little swelling as that joey started to get up to around the size of an apple. And then it's going to start and poke its head out. Is that no good? Now, they're wonderful mums. Dad doesn't have a lot to do with any of the joey upbringing, but as a wonderful mum, she protects that joey in a pouch for the most vulnerable part of its life, the first 6 months. But then the real work begins because there are so many toxic and poisonous plants in the rainforest that if the joey eats the wrong plant, it will die. And so mum is going to pass that information on to the joey, teach them the seasonal aspects of what foods are in season, when, which foods you can eat and which foods you can't. Now, one of the things that tree kangaroos suffer from is a high mortality rate in joeys because they fall to the ground. So you think at the time, here you go, bit of avocado is her favourite. You think at a time, that joey is going to come out of the pouch and it starts to live with mum on the branches. But imagine that as your introduction to the world. And so it's a really precarious time for little joeys. Now, this is a good, here you go, would you like another little bit? You still chewing? Oh, there you go. This is called a Goodfellows tree kangaroo. and they're from New Guinea. Now, they fit here at the Reptile Park because we keep Australian and Australasian species, a real natural setting where you get a taste of what the forests are like, even the forests that we can't see. The Goodfellows are from New Guinea. Now, in Australia, we have Lumholtz tree kangaroo that lives just behind Cairns up in the Atherton Tablelands, and the Bennett's tree kangaroo, which lives up near Cooktown, down bordering big forest, but now down into the mangroves right alongside the ocean. Now, both species of tree kangaroo in Australia are endangered, and almost every species in New Guinea is also endangered. In Australia, Lumholtz and Bennett's have suffered from habitat fragmentation, habitat destruction, car strike, dog attack massively, and you know, they're facing real challenges. The Bennett's tree kangaroo is one, even though it's in Australia, it's one of the most poorly understood species because where it lives is very remote. Where are you going? Now have a look, they're not very agile on the ground. A really odd species because you know, they're at home in the trees, but still a little bit clumsy. And when on the ground, they still hop like a kangaroo. So they're in the kangaroo family. Here you go. Would you like a bit more? They're in the kangaroo family, and the kangaroo family are macropods. And macropod means large-footed. Okay, so tree kangaroos are related to wallabies, wallaroos, potoroos, kangaroos, bedongs, a really big family. Now, in Australia, I mentioned the threats. In New Guinea, they face the same threats in West Papua, although hunting is a real pressure on them. And as hunting has gone from using a bow and spear, a bow and arrow, to now hunting pressures including rifles and modern weapons, it's really put the tree kangaroos in a hard spot. You can see how beautiful their coat is. Where you going, darling? You can see how beautiful their coat is, and that's quite desired as well. And we'll just see if she wants another bit. Here's Banjo over the back. Now, you might wonder, how can you tell the difference between a male and a female? To look at them, it's very subtle. But in actual fact, Banjo's a little bit younger, but his head's a bit thicker, and his upper frame will get a little bit bigger than Kimbe. We can also see his little manly parts hanging just beneath his tail. So he doesn't have a pouch, and he has what you would imagine to have there, whereas Kimbe has a pouch. So males are a little bit bigger, but there's obvious differences, biological differences, that are very easy to spot. In the wild, they're typically solitary animals. You will have a male with a territory that overlaps females, but fair to say they're solitary. They don't really have interactions in the wild, aside from territorial disputes or male and female pairing up to mate when it's the right time of year. Now, I might just leave them a few little bits here. And their diet, we try to replicate wild as best as possible. So that means there's a large variety of foods fed. Now, if you come here, some of the species that aren't necessarily present in their wild range but are really palatable and they like, this is mulberry. So we've got some mulberry, some umbrella tree, and we've got hibiscus. So there's 3 species in there today that are all really, really nice and palatable foods. We'll just see. Yeah, Kimber, do you want a bit more? Here you go. So you see that tail in effect now? That's really balancing her body. So her feet are different than kangaroos that would be on the ground. So kangaroos on the ground, the foot's much longer, the pad's not as wide. Whereas with her, the foot's only about as long as my hand, but it's also as wide as my hand. And as I say, if it was a normal kangaroo, it would be half the width of my hand. So that enables her, you watch this. See those feet, those claws, but those pads really grip on. Like I say, the front paws are so strong to be able to lift the weight up and climb. And she's having a bit of hibiscus now. Now, we don't have a lot of contact. They're not hand-reared. So they're certainly conditioned to come down and food and take some food. That enables us to be able to do health checks and just say hello to the animals. But reality is that they don't have a lot of contact. That's important in the hopes that they breed. There is a managed program for Goodfellows tree kangaroos throughout the world, mostly in Australia. So we're waiting for that day when we look inside that pouch and we have our little joeys. But that's about it for the tree kangaroos today. So thank you very much for watching. Maybe a few questions if people have them?
Yeah, so you mentioned the different species. What are their locations around the world? Are they found in Europe or just Australia and Australasia? So
tree kangaroos are only found in Australia and just north of Australia to Papua New Guinea and West Papua. it's a really unique story in that, and I'm sorry for anyone that's not familiar with Australia and where New Guinea and Southeast Asia sits, but in Australia and New Guinea and West Papua, we have marsupials. We have birds of paradise, bowerbirds. Australia has more species of lizard than any continent on Earth. And the really interesting thing is that when you get up to New Guinea or Northern Australia, your next closest land is Southeast Asia. If you throw a rock from New Guinea or Northern Australia over to Southeast Asia, you get bears, cats, primates, rodents. Australia didn't have any of that. It's a really big problem for us because when things like domestic dogs turn wild or Europeans introduced feral fox and feral cat to Australia, it's why we have the world's highest rate of small mammal extinction. And realistically, the point and take-home message there is that these weird and wacky things like tree kangaroos only exist in Australia and New Guinea. Just there. And when you go across the pond, you get monkeys. We don't have any of that. But what we compensate for is birds, like birds of paradise, and kangaroos that live up trees, and duck-billed platypus and echidnas. So, in short, to answer the question, tree kangaroos are only found in North Queensland, New Guinea, and West Papua.
What do they eat in the wild? So we've seen some avocado here.
Yep.
Do they eat that kind of stuff in the wild?
Tree kangaroos have a pretty versatile diet in the wild. One of the biggest threats to them is that, or to joeys, is that a lot of the forest foods are toxic. They're poisonous to eat. So a joey really learns from its mother the right food and available foods and seasonal aspects to that diet in the wild. For us, we try and duplicate as close to wild as we can. So there's a real mixture in that we've got browse that goes in daily, and in here we've got mulberry, hibiscus, and umbrella tree. We've got some snacks that they quite enjoy, which is today's cucumber, banana, and avocado. They've got a mixed kangaroo pellet, which is an artificial pellet, but really high in goodness. We've got some lucerne chaff and other light browsables. And then we've got a bucket of mushrooms and broccolini, sweet potato, corn, and that's just for today. So it's a really varied diet. We try and replicate certainly the nutrients they take from it from wild and the browse species as best we can.
And I guess a personal question to round out the afternoon, Tim. Have you seen any tree kangaroos in the wild?
Tree kangaroos are one of my favourite species. And one of my big goals in life is to see every mammal in Australia. And that's not easy. Every vertebrate animal in Australia I want to see. Tree kangaroos, I've seen Lumholtz tree kangaroos in Australia a bunch of times. I've looked for bennets up near Cooktown more times than I care to announce. It's quite embarrassing, but they're really hard to find.
So you haven't seen a Bennett's?
No, I haven't seen a Bennett's. I've been in West Papua, and I've been in areas where I could find tree kangaroos scratches on the trees, feces on the ground. But again, you're looking for something that's normally daytime when we're looking, and they're nocturnal. And you're talking it's 30 metres up in the canopy, tucked down. You might get a glimpse of a tail or movement if you're lucky. But my experience with tree roos is pretty limited. All good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for watching again, everyone. We're having a wonderful time bringing you these live streams.